The sky was a deep, bruising purple, an altitude where the air gets so thin you feel like you're breathing through a wet rag. My P-51 Mustang, Iowa's Revenge, was shaking so hard I thought the rivets were going to pop like champagne corks. I looked up through the plexiglass, my breath frosting in thick, jagged patterns, and there they were, 6 Japanese silver specks, glinting in the high sun, cruising along like they were on a Sunday drive. They were at 38,000 feet. I was at 33, and my engine was already screaming for mercy. It was June 1945, just off the coast of Iwo Jima, and we were completely helpless. The air was a freezing void, 60 degrees below zero outside that thin skin of aluminum, and all I could hear was the ragged, rhythmic thumping of my own heart against my ribs. I stared at those bombers, their contrails drawing long, mocking white lines across the heavens, and I felt a knot of pure, cold fury tighten in my gut. The manual for the Mustang said our service ceiling was 41,000 feet, but that was on paper, in perfect conditions, with a brand new engine. Out here in the Pacific, with the humidity eating our wires and the salt air pitting our pistons, 33,000 was the wall. We'd hit it, and the controls would turn to mush. The wings would lose their grip on the air, and you'd just slide backward into a stall, falling miles through the clouds while those Japs dropped their payloads on our boys down on the beach without a single worry in the world. They knew we couldn't touch them. They were flying 5,000 feet higher than our maximum ceiling, and that distance felt like 1,000,000 miles. That was the central dilemma that kept me awake in my cot every night, listening to the waves crash against the black volcanic sand. We were the best pilots in the world, flying the best planes ever built, and we were being outclassed by the simple physics of altitude. The brass told us to just keep patrolling, to provide a presence, but a presence doesn't shoot down bombers. I knew that if we didn't find a way to bridge that 5,000-foot gap, the B-29 bases we were supposed to be protecting would be nothing but smoking craters by the end of the month. What happened next changed everything, because I decided that if the manual said the plane couldn't go higher, then the manual had to be wrong. I was going to strip my bird down to the bone and gamble my life on a theory I'd developed back in a drafty garage in Des Moines. Back in Iowa, before the world caught fire, I spent my summers working for my Uncle Silas. He was an eccentric man, a self-taught engineer who obsessed over the new turbochargers they were putting in racing cars. He taught me that an engine is just a set of lungs, and if you want it to work in thin air, you have to change the way it breathes. We'd spend 16 hours a day covered in grease, filing down intake manifolds and experimenting with fuel mixtures that would have made a chemist nervous. Silas used to say, "Frankie, the engineers build these things for the average man, but you ain't average, and the sky don't care about averages." I took those words with me into the cockpit. I knew every bolt and gasket of that Packard-built Merlin engine, and I knew she had more to give if I was willing to break the rules. Dutch Miller was my wingman, a kid from Philly who could fly the crates they came in if you gave him enough gas. We were sitting on the edge of the runway, watching another flight of those high-altitude Japs pass over, and Dutch just spat into the dust. "It's a joke, Frank," he said, his voice cracking with frustration. "We might as well be throwing rocks at the moon. I pushed my throttle so far into the gate today I thought the lever was gonna snap, and I still watched them sail 5,000 feet over my canopy. It makes you feel small, you know? Like we're just ants down here." I looked at Dutch, then back up at the sky. "They aren't gods, Dutch," I told him. "They're just light. We're too heavy. We're carrying armor plate, extra radios, and 300 rounds of ammo we never get to use because we can't get close enough to pull the trigger. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten." I went to see Sergeant Pops Riley that evening. Pops was the head of our ground crew, a man who looked like he was made of old leather and tobacco spit. He'd been fixing planes since the Great War, and he had a way of looking at a Mustang like he could see its soul. I told him I wanted to strip Iowa's Revenge. I wanted the armor plating behind the seat gone. I wanted the heavy radio gear out. I wanted 4 of the 6 machine guns removed, leaving me with just 2. Pops looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Sullivan, you go up there with no armor and 2 guns, and if a stray bullet finds you, you're a dead man. The brass will have my stripes for even letting you think about it. The brass isn't the one watching those bombers drop eggs on our friends, Pops," I said, leaning over his workbench. "If I can get the weight down by 1,500 pounds, and if we retune the secondary stage of the supercharger to kick in earlier, I can find those 5,000 feet. I know it." Pops chewed on his cigar for a long minute, looking at the schematics spread out on the table. He knew I was right about the physics, even if he hated the risk. "It's suicide, kid," he whispered, but I saw the spark in his eyes. He hated being helpless just as much as I did. That night, under the cover of a tropical rainstorm that muffled the sound of our wrenches, we started tearing my plane apart. We worked by flashlight, the smell of aviation fuel and wet canvas thick in the air. Every bolt we removed felt like a confession. The armor plate was a heavy, slab-sided piece of steel that was supposed to keep me alive if a Zero got on my tail. Tossing it onto the hangar floor felt like giving up my shield. Then came the radio, a bulky, 50-pound beast that linked me to the world. Without it, I'd be flying deaf and dumb once I got out of visual range. Then the guns. The Mustang's 650 calibers were its teeth. Taking 4 of them out felt like pulling my own incisors. But as the pile of discarded metal grew, the plane started to look different. It looked lean. It looked hungry. It looked like something that belonged in the upper atmosphere, not tied down to the earth by the weight of fear and regulation. The next morning, the air was unusually clear. You could see the horizon for 60 miles. The blue of the water meeting the blue of the sky in a line so sharp it looked like it could cut you. The word came down from the radar shack. Incoming. Multiple bogies, heading 280, altitude, extreme. That was the signal. I climbed into the cockpit, and immediately I felt the difference. The seat felt hollow without the armor. The cockpit felt cavernous without the radio. I signaled to Pops, who gave me a grim nod and a thumbs up. I pushed the throttle forward, and the Mustang didn't just roll, it leapt. I was off the ground in half the distance it usually took, the lightened airframe screaming for the sky. Dutch was in his standard Mustang trying to keep up, but I was out-climbing him 2-1. I watched my altimeter needle sweep past 20,000, then 25. Usually, this was where the sluggishness started, where the stick began to feel like it was stuck in cooling molasses. But not today. At 30,000, I was still climbing at 1,500 feet per minute. I looked up. The silver specks were there, but for the first time, they didn't look like dots. I could see the shape of the wings. I could see the twin engines of the Mitsubishis. They were at 38,000, and I was at 35, and I was still gaining. My lungs were burning, the oxygen mask hissing as it struggled to feed me in the thinning pressure. The cold was absolute. It seeped through my flight suit, through my gloves, until my fingers felt like brittle glass. My toes were numb, and every time I moved my head, the vertigo threatened to spin the world out of control. But I didn't care. I was at 37,000 feet. I was looking the enemy in the eye. I could see the Japanese tail gunner in the lead bomber. I could see him looking down, probably expecting to see the usual frustrated Americans 5,000 feet below. I saw the moment he noticed me. He didn't just look. He recoiled. He probably thought he was seeing a ghost, a phantom plane that had broken the laws of nature to reach his sanctuary. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I didn't have a radio to tell Dutch what I was seeing, and I didn't have the firepower to spray the whole formation. I had 2 guns and a few seconds of surprise. I lined up the lead bomber's port engine in my sights. The air was so thin that the plane felt twitchy, like a bird on a wire. I had to be delicate. One wrong move and I'd stall out and spin, and at this altitude, a spin was a death sentence. I squeezed the trigger. The 250 calibers vibrated through the floorboards, a lighter, faster thrum than the usual 6-gun roar. Tracers arced out, looking slow in the crystalline air, and then I saw the sparks. The port engine of that Mitsubishi erupted in a fountain of white smoke and orange flame. The bomber winced, its wing dipping as the pilot struggled to keep it level. The formation scattered, the silver birds breaking their perfect geometry in a panic. They weren't used to being hunted. They were used to being observers. I dived under the second bomber, the G-forces pulling the blood from my head until my vision narrowed to a tiny, flickering tunnel. I pulled up, using the Mustang's newfound lightness to perform a vertical climb that would have been impossible 24 hours ago. I came up right under the belly of the second plane, so close I could see the individual rivets on its fuselage and the oil streaks trailing from its cowlings. I fired again. This time, I caught the fuel tanks in the wing root. There was no explosion, not at first, just a sudden, violent bloom of fire that seemed to be sucked out of the plane by the thin air. The bomber began to slide sideways, its flight path becoming a jagged, desperate line toward the ocean miles below. I watched it go, and for a split second, I saw the pilot's face. He was young, maybe younger than me, and his goggles were pushed up on his forehead. He looked terrified. He looked human. In that moment, the war wasn't about maps or generals or ceilings. It was just 2 men in metal boxes, miles above the earth, trying to survive the impossible. I didn't feel joy. I just felt a heavy, cold weight in my chest. But there were 4 more bombers, and they were diving now, trying to get away from the ghost plane that had come for them. I tried to follow, but my engine suddenly coughed. A long, sputtering gasp that sent a shiver of ice down my spine. The modified supercharger was over-revving. I'd pushed Silas's theories too far. The temperature gauge was pinned in the red, and white smoke began to curl from the edges of my cowling. I had to throttle back, had to let them go. I watched the remaining 4 bombers disappear into the haze of the lower altitudes, where Dutch and the rest of the squadron were waiting for them like wolves at the bottom of a hill. I was alone at 38,000 feet, in a dying plane with no radio and no armor. The descent was the longest 30 minutes of my life. Every time the engine sputtered, I thought it was the end. I drifted down through the layers of the atmosphere, watching the world change from purple to deep blue to the pale, hazy turquoise of the Pacific summer. My hands were shaking so hard I had to grip the stick with both arms just to keep the wings level. When I finally saw the black strip of the runway on Iwo Jima, I felt a sob catch in my throat. I didn't have the power to go around for a second attempt. I had one shot. I flared the plane, the tires screaming as they hit the volcanic grit, and I rolled to a stop just feet from the end of the runway. Pops Riley was the first one to reach the cockpit. He didn't say a word. He just looked at the scorched cowling and the empty gun ports. Then he looked at me. I was covered in frost, my face blue from the cold, and I couldn't stop shivering. He reached up, grabbed my hand, and squeezed it. "You did it, Sullivan," he whispered. "You touched the untouchables." That day, we proved that the ceiling wasn't a physical limit. It was a mental one. We didn't win the war with that one flight, but we stopped the Japs from thinking they were safe. We showed them that there was nowhere they could go where we couldn't find them. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. Decades later, I still wake up in the middle of the night, feeling that 38,000-foot cold. I can still see the purple sky and the silver specks of those bombers. People ask me why I never talked about it, why I didn't take the medals they tried to give me later. The truth is, I felt like a thief. I'd stolen those 5,000 feet from the laws of physics, and I'd paid for them with the lives of men who were just as scared as I was. I don't want to be remembered as a hero who shot down planes. I want to be remembered as the boy from Iowa who refused to believe the manual. I carried that lesson through the rest of my life. When doctors told me my heart was failing in my 70s, I told them about the stripped-down Mustang. I told them that the limits are just suggestions if you're willing to lose the extra weight. I'm telling this story now because I'm 89 years old, and I'm about to reach a new ceiling, one that no engine modification can help me bypass. I want people to know that the greatest heights are reached not by those with the most power, but by those willing to sacrifice their security for a chance to see what's above the clouds. The sky is a big place, and it's got plenty of room for those brave enough to fly light. It's funny how the small things stick with you. Not the fire, not the adrenaline, but the smell of the oxygen mask. That stale, rubbery scent that meant life in a place where life shouldn't exist. I remember the way the sun looked up there, unfiltered by the thick air of the lower world. It was white, a piercing, holy kind of light that made everything on the ground seem unimportant. For a few minutes, I wasn't a soldier and I wasn't a sergeant. I was just a human being who had pushed back the curtain of the world to see what was behind it. And what I saw was that we are all very small, very fragile, and very, very lucky to be here at all. When the war ended, I went back to Iowa. I couldn't stand the sight of a garage anymore, so I bought a small farm and spent my days looking at the dirt instead of the sky. I think I needed to be grounded, literally, after being that high up. Dutch Miller stayed in the Air Force, flew in Korea, and eventually retired as a colonel. He'd visit me sometimes, and we'd sit on my porch, drinking lemonade and watching the hawks circle the cornfields. He never asked me about that day at 38,000 feet. He knew. He'd seen the smoke from the ground, and he'd seen the look in my eyes when I climbed out of that cockpit. Some things don't need words. I think about the Japanese pilot sometimes. I hope he made it to his raft. I hope he went home to a farm in Japan and sat on a porch of his own. We were enemies because a map said so, but up there, in the purple void, we were brothers in the struggle against the wind and the cold. That's the thing about war. It forces you to find your limits, and then it forces you to break them. I'm glad I broke mine. I'm glad I saw the top of the world. It's a quiet, cold, beautiful place, and even 70 years later, part of me is still up there, floating in the thin air, watching the silver specks fade into the sun. The Mustang Iowa's Revenge was scrapped in late '45. They didn't see the point in keeping a plane that had been hollowed out and pushed past its breaking point. They said it was structurally unsound. Maybe it was, but for one afternoon, it was the fastest, highest, most perfect thing ever built by human hands. And that's enough for me. You don't need a monument when you've left your mark on the very edge of the world. I can still feel the vibration of the stick in my palm, the gentle, terrifying shudder of a machine giving everything it has. It's a good way to go out, I think, giving everything you have to reach a place no one thought you could go. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I'm finally able to tell this because the shame of surviving while others didn't has finally faded into the peace of old age. I realize now that my life wasn't a mistake, and my survival wasn't a fluke. It was a gift, bought and paid for by the curiosity of an Iowa boy and the steady hands of an old mechanic. I hope that whenever you feel like you've hit your ceiling, you remember me. I hope you think about stripping away the armor and the extra weight that holds you down. You might be surprised at how much higher you can fly when you're not afraid to be a little bit lighter. The sun is setting now, over the fields I've spent the last 50 years tending. The light is turning that same deep purple I remember from the Pacific. It's a beautiful color. It's the color of the end of the day and the beginning of the stars. I'm not afraid of the dark anymore. I've been higher than the clouds, and I've seen that the sun is always there, even when you can't see it from the ground. You just have to be willing to climb. You just have to be willing to let go of the things that keep you safe. That's the only way to truly touch the sky. That was my war, and that was my peace. Just a boy, a plane, and 5,000 feet of impossible space. Continuing script narrative, the silence in the hangar the night we stripped the plane was something I'll never forget. It wasn't just a lack of noise, it was a heavy, expectant sort of quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. Pops Riley and I didn't talk much. When you're doing something that could get you court-martialed or killed, you don't waste breath on chatter. I remember the clatter of the armor plate hitting the concrete floor. It sounded so final. It was a 3/8-inch slab of hardened steel designed to stop a 7mm round from a Zero's machine gun. To a pilot, that steel is like a security blanket. Removing it felt like walking onto a battlefield in my shirt sleeves. But as Pops hauled it away, I watched the landing gear struts of the Mustang rise just a fraction of an inch. The plane was already breathing easier. "You're sure about the radio, Frank?" Pops had asked, wiping his greasy hands on a rag that was more black than white. "If you get into trouble up there, you're on your own. No one to call for a fix, no one to tell where you went down." I looked at the bulky radio set, a tangle of vacuum tubes and heavy copper wiring. It was a lifeline, sure, but at 38,000 feet, a lifeline is just an anchor if it keeps you from reaching the surface. "If I'm at 38,000, Pops, there ain't nobody who can help me anyway," I replied. I felt a strange sense of liberation as we pulled the wiring harnesses. We were simplifying the world. We were reducing the war to its absolute essentials: an engine, a wing, and a man. I spent that night lying on my back, staring up at the thatched roof of our hut, my mind racing through the calculations Silas had taught me. Density, altitude, manifold pressure, air-fuel ratios. I was trying to visualize the air molecules at that height, spread thin, cold, and elusive. I knew the trick wasn't just weight, it was heat. If we could keep the fuel from icing up and keep the oil flowing just right, the Merlin engine would think it was still at 20,000 feet. I fell asleep dreaming of silver birds and purple voids, and when the dawn broke, I felt a clarity I hadn't known since I left Iowa. I wasn't just going to fly, I was going to transcend. The morning of the flight, the ground crew looked at Iowa's Revenge with a mix of awe and pity. She looked skeletal. With the gun ports taped over to reduce drag and the extra weight gone, she sat high on her wheels, looking like she wanted to float away even before I started the engine. Dutch Miller came over, his flight suit rumpled, looking at the empty slots where the .50 calibers used to be. "You're only carrying 2 guns, Frank. What if you run into Zeros?" I climbed onto the wing, checking the seal on my canopy. "If I run into Zeros at 38,000, Dutch, then the Japs have found a way to fly on magic. If I stay low, I'm dead anyway. This is the only way." If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. The takeoff was a revelation. I didn't have to fight the plane into the air, she simply stepped off the ground. By the time I retracted the gear, I was already at 5,000 feet. The rate of climb was staggering. It felt like I was being pulled upward by an invisible wire. I watched the altimeter dials spinning, 10,000, 15, 20. At 25,000, I felt the first real change. The air outside was thinning, and the cockpit heater was struggling to keep the frost off my knees. I reached down and adjusted the mixture, leaning it out further than the flight manual ever allowed. The engine note changed from a deep roar to a high metallic hum, like a singer hitting a note right on the edge of her range. At 30,000 feet, I began to enter the dead zone. This was where the air became too thin to support the weight of a standard Mustang. I felt the stick grow light in my hands, the response of the ailerons becoming delayed and mushy. But because I was 1,500 pounds lighter, the dead zone had moved. I wasn't sinking. I was still climbing. I looked out at my wings. In the thin air, they seemed to vibrate with a high-frequency shimmer. I could see the curve of the Earth, the deep navy of the ocean meeting the black blue of the upper atmosphere. It was a lonely, terrifyingly beautiful sight. I was higher than any American fighter had ever been in combat over the Pacific. Then I saw them. The High Altitude Express. That's what we called the Japanese bomber formation that hit us every morning like clockwork. They were beautiful, in a deadly sort of way. Long-nosed Mitsubishi G4Ms, their silver skins polished to a mirror finish to reflect the heat of the sun. They were flying in a tight V formation, confident and undisturbed. They didn't even have fighter escorts. They didn't need them. No American plane could reach them, and no anti-aircraft gun on the islands could track them accurately at that height. They were the kings of the sky, and I was the interloper coming to steal their crown. My oxygen mask was pulsing against my face, the regulator clattering as it fought to keep my lungs inflated. I was starting to feel the effects of hypoxia, a strange, floating euphoria that makes you think everything is perfect even as your brain begins to shut down. I had to shake my head violently to stay focused. I looked at the altimeter. 37,500. I was there. I was level with them. I could see the crew in the side blisters of the lead bomber. One of them was holding a camera, probably taking reconnaissance photos of the airfield I had just left. I wondered what he thought when he saw a lone P-51 rising out of the haze like a vengeful ghost. I didn't have much time. My engine was beginning to hunt, the RPM surging and dipping as the supercharger struggled with the rarefied air. I kicked the rudder, sliding my nose behind the trailing bomber on the left wing of the formation. I had to be careful. A sudden movement would snap the air over my wings and send me into a flat spin. I was flying on a razor's edge. I brought my thumb to the gun trigger. Only 2 guns. I had to make every round count. I waited until the silver tail of the Mitsubishi filled my entire windscreen, until I could see the yellow bird insignia painted on its rudder. The recoil of the 2 .50 calibers was surprisingly gentle in the thin air. I saw the tracers streak out, bright red lines that seemed to hang in the sky. They walked right across the bomber's wing, stitching a line of holes from the tip to the engine cowling. A spray of white liquid, fuel or hydraulic fluid, trailed out, instantly turning into a cloud of ice crystals. The bomber didn't explode. It just seemed to lose its will to fly. It tilted slowly, gracefully, away from the formation. I saw the crew scrambling inside, their dark flight suits sharp against the silver interior. I felt a sudden, sharp pang of empathy. They were just men, miles from home, caught in a machine that was failing them. But the rest of the formation was reacting now. The tail gunners opened up, their 20mm cannons spitting slow, arcing shells toward me. In the thin air, the shells seemed to move in slow motion. I nudged the stick, slipping my lightened Mustang to the side. Without the armor and the extra guns, the plane was incredibly agile. I felt like I was dancing. I dived under the formation, the air screaming past my canopy, and then I pulled up into a high yo-yo maneuver that would have stalled a standard plane. I came down on the second bomber from above, my shadows falling across its cockpit. I saw the pilot look up, his face a mask of pure shock. I fired again, a long burst that chewed into the fuselage behind the cockpit. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. Smoke began to pour from the bomber's waist windows. It was over. The formation broke apart, the untouchables scattering like leaves in a gale. They dived for the safety of the lower altitudes, abandoning their mission. They didn't drop a single bomb on the airfield that day. I tried to follow them, to finish what I'd started, but that's when the Merlin engine finally gave up the ghost. A loud metallic clack echoed through the cockpit, followed by the terrifying sound of grinding metal. The propeller slowed, the blades feathered by the wind, and suddenly, the only sound was the whistling of the air. I was at 36,000 feet with a dead engine and no radio. The silence was absolute. It was the most frightening thing I've ever experienced. I was a 3-ton glider in a world where the air was too thin to glide. I felt the nose drop, the Mustang seeking the thicker air below. I looked down at the Pacific, a vast, flat expanse of blue that looked like hammered copper in the morning sun. I remember thinking about my Uncle Silas and his garage. I wondered if he'd be proud of me, or if he'd tell me I was a fool for breaking the engine. I probably was a fool, but I was a fool who had seen the top of the world. I managed to stretch the glide for miles. The Mustang was so light now that she stayed airborne far longer than she had any right to. I drifted down, passing through 30,000, then 20, then 10. The warmth began to return to the cockpit, the frost melting off the glass in long, weeping streaks. I saw the green smudge of Iwo Jima in the distance. It looked so small, a tiny speck of rock in an endless sea. I realized then how much we fight over so little. All that blood, all that steel, for a few miles of volcanic ash. But that ash was home, and it was where my friends were, and I fought like hell to reach it. I landed dead stick. No power, no flaps, just the momentum of the descent. I hit the runway hard, the tires smoking as they struggled to grab the surface. When I finally came to a stop, I just sat there for a long time, my hands still gripped around the stick. My lungs felt like they were full of needles, and my heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Pops. Riley ran out to the plane, his face white with worry. He climbed onto the wing and yanked the canopy open. "You okay, Sullivan? You look like you've seen a ghost." I looked at him, my eyes stinging with tears I didn't even know were there. "I didn't just see them, Pops," I whispered. "I touched them." The story of the ghost Mustang spread through the islands like wildfire. The Japanese never flew that high again. They knew we had something that could reach them, even if they didn't know it was just a stripped-down crate held together by Iowa grit and a mechanic's prayers. We changed the tactical balance of the Iwo Jima campaign that day, not with a fleet of bombers or a division of tanks, but with a single plane that refused to accept its limits. It's a lesson I've tried to pass on to my grandkids. The world will tell you what your ceiling is. They'll give you manuals and rules and tell you what's impossible, but they don't know what you've got in your heart, and they don't know what you're willing to leave behind to get where you need to go. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. Looking back from the porch of my farmhouse all these years later, the war feels like a different life. But that day in the purple sky, that stays with me. It's the one moment in my life where I felt truly free. No armor to protect me, no radio to guide me, no heavy guns to weigh me down. Just me and the machine and the infinite blue. Maybe that's what heaven is like. Maybe it's just a place where you don't have to carry anything extra, and you finally have the altitude you always wanted. I'm finally sharing this because I think we're living in a time where people feel heavy. They feel weighed down by their own armor, by the things they think they need to survive. But sometimes, the only way to survive is to let go, to strip it all down to the essentials and see how high you can climb. I'm an old man now, and my own engine is starting to sputter. But I'm not afraid of the glide. I know that the air gets thicker as you get closer to the ground, and I know that there's a place waiting for me at the end of the runway. I hope my story gives you a little bit of that Iowa grit. I hope it makes you look up at the sky and wonder what's 5,000 feet above your head. The memories of the men I served with are the most precious things I have left. There was Dutch Miller, who never lost his Philly swagger even when we were pinned down in the foxholes. There was Kid Thompson, who could fix a radio with a piece of chewing gum and a prayer. And of course, there was Pops Riley. Pops died in '62, but I still see his face every time I look at a wrench. He was the one who taught me that the machine is only as good as the man who trusts it. We were a team, a brotherhood of grease and sweat, and we did things that the history books will never fully capture. But that's okay. We know what we did. We know we touched the untouchables. It's funny, the things you remember when the world starts to fade. I don't remember the medals or the ceremonies. I remember the smell of the rain on the volcanic sand. I remember the taste of the lukewarm coffee in the mess hall. And I remember the way the light looked at 38,000 feet. It was a white, cold, perfect light. It made everything clear. It showed me that the world is a beautiful place, even when we're trying our best to tear it apart. I'm glad I saw it. I'm glad I took the risk. Because in the end, we aren't defined by the armor we wear, but by the height we reach when we're brave enough to take it off. I'm Frank Sullivan, and I was a sergeant in the United States Army Air Forces. I flew a plane that shouldn't have been able to fly, and I saw things that no man was meant to see. I've carried those memories for 70 years, like a secret treasure. But now, They belong to you. Use them well. Don't let the manual tell you how high you can go. Find your own 5,000 feet. And when you get there, take a look around. The view is spectacular. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. Looking back on it all, I realized that the hardest part wasn't the flight itself. It was the decision to change. We humans, we get comfortable in our ruts. We accept the maximum ceiling because it's safe. It gives us an excuse not to try. But once you've seen what's above that ceiling, you can never go back to being satisfied with the haze below. You spend the rest of your life looking up, wondering if you could have gone just a little bit higher. I think about the morality of what I did. I shot down men who were doing their jobs, just like I was. I used my skills to destroy. That's a heavy thing to carry into your twilight years. But I also know that if I hadn't flown that day, more of my friends would have died. It's the terrible math of war. You kill to save, and you destroy to protect. There's no clean way to do it. All you can do is hope that the cause you're fighting for is worth the weight on your soul. I believe ours was. We were fighting for a world where people could be free, even if we had to lose a part of our own freedom to get there. I hope that when you think of Frank Sullivan, you don't just think of a soldier. I hope you think of a man who loved the air, a man who understood that the sky isn't a barrier, but an invitation. I'm finally at peace with my past, and I'm ready for whatever comes next. The glide is almost over, and the runway is in sight. It's been a long flight, and I'm a little tired, but I wouldn't trade a single mile of it for all the security in the world. Thank you for listening to an old veteran's story. It means more to me than I can put into words. Keep flying light, and don't be afraid of the purple sky. It's where the truth lives. The narrative continues to expand on the emotional and technical journey. The weeks following that high-altitude mission were a blur of nervous activity. The Japanese didn't just stop coming. They changed their tactics. They knew there was a demon in the sky, a plane that could defy the laws of gravity. They started sending escorts, but because those escorts had to carry extra fuel and armor to reach that altitude, they were sluggish. They had lost their advantage. We had brought them down to our level by rising up to theirs. I remember sitting in the briefing room, watching the intelligence officers try to figure out how a P-51 had achieved a 38,000-foot intercept. I just sat in the back, my hands shoved in my pockets, smiling to myself. Pops Riley caught my eye and winked. It was our little secret, a victory of the grease monkeys over the theorists. One afternoon, a young pilot named Billy the Kid Thompson came up to me. He was barely 19, with a face that still had the softness of childhood. He looked at Iowa's Revenge, which we had mostly put back together, though she never quite felt the same. "Sarge," he asked, his voice low, "how did you do it? Weren't you scared up there? Alone, with no radio, no armor, just you and the Japs?" I looked at him, and for a second, I saw myself 2 years earlier. "Billy," I said, "I was terrified. I was so scared I could hear my hair turning gray. But there's a difference between being scared and being stopped. Being scared is just your body telling you that what you're doing matters. If you aren't scared, you aren't paying attention." He nodded, though I could tell he didn't quite get it. You can't explain that kind of fear until you've felt the engine sputter in the silence of the upper atmosphere. It's a holy fear. It strips away all the bullshit of the world. Up there, you aren't a Democrat or a Republican, a rich kid or a farm boy. You're just a spark of life trying to keep itself from being blown out by the cosmic wind. I think Billy eventually found his own version of that fear, but he didn't make it home from the Philippines. That's another thing I carry, the names of the boys who didn't get to grow old and tell their stories. I tell mine for them too. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. As the war moved closer to the Japanese home islands, the missions became longer and more grueling. We were flying 6, 7, 8 hours at a time. The B-29s were the big players now, and our job was to be their little brothers, protecting them as they made their runs. But the memory of that high-altitude flight stayed with the squadron. It became a sort of legend, the day Sullivan stripped his bird and touched the moon. It gave the other guys a sense of possibility. They started asking Pops to tweak their engines, to shave off a few pounds here and there. We became the Light Brigade, a group of pilots who valued speed and altitude over safety and doctrine. I remember a specific night in August of '45. The air was thick and humid, the kind of night where you feel like you're breathing soup. We got word that a strange, new kind of bomb had been dropped on Hiroshima. We didn't understand what it meant at the time. We just knew the war was changing again. I sat on the wing of my plane, looking up at the stars. They were so bright, so cold. I realized that the technology we were creating was outstripping our wisdom to use it. We had reached the ceiling of our humanity, and we were about to break through it into something much more terrifying. I felt a strange sense of mourning for the simpler war we had been fighting, the one where it was just men and machines and 5,000 feet of air. When the surrender was announced, the island erupted in a kind of madness I've never seen since. Men were screaming, crying, firing their sidearms into the air, but I just walked away from the noise. I went down to the beach and sat on a piece of driftwood watching the waves. I felt empty. For 2 years, my entire existence had been defined by the struggle to stay alive and the drive to go higher. Now, that was gone. I was just Frank Sullivan again, a boy from Iowa with grease under his fingernails. I didn't know how to be that person anymore. The war had hollowed me out, just like I had hollowed out my Mustang. It took me a long time to fill that space back up. I spent years wandering, taking odd jobs, trying to find something that gave me that same feeling of reaching. I worked on oil rigs, I raced cars, I even tried my hand at commercial flying. But nothing compared to that afternoon off Iwo Jima. Eventually, I realized that I was looking in the wrong place. The altitude I was seeking wasn't in the sky. It was in the way I lived my life. It was in the honesty of my relationships, the integrity of my work, and the peace I found in the quiet moments. I went back to Iowa, back to the dirt, and I finally found my ceiling. And it was exactly where I needed it to be. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I'm an old man now, and I spend a lot of time in this rocking chair. My eyes aren't what they used to be, but my memory is as sharp as a bayonet. I can still feel the cold. I can still hear the Merlin's song. I hope that by telling this, I've given you something to hold on to when the world feels heavy. Don't let the weight of the world keep you from the sky. There's always a way to go higher, if you're willing to leave the armor behind. I want to end this by saying something to the veterans who might be listening. I know what you're carrying. I know the weight of the things you saw and the things you had to do. I know the silence of the upper atmosphere that you still live in. You don't have to carry it all. It's okay to strip the plane. It's okay to let the armor go. You've done your duty, and you've earned the right to fly light. Let the memories be a source of strength, not a burden. We're all heading for the same runway, and the only thing that matters is how we handled the flight. I'm Frank Sullivan. I was a pilot, a mechanic, and a survivor. I touched the Japanese bombers when everyone said it was impossible. And I'm telling you now, nothing is impossible if you're willing to change. The sky is waiting for you. All you have to do is climb. The script continues to delve deeper into the specific sensory memories and final philosophical reflections. I remember the exact moment the lead bomber's engine caught fire. It wasn't like in the movies, with a big explosion and a ball of flame. It was a slow, sickly yellow flare that flickered against the silver metal, followed by a thick, oily rope of black smoke. It looked like a wound. I remember thinking, there are 7 men in that plane. 7 men who have mothers and wives and lives. For a heartbeat, I wanted to reach out and put the fire out. I wanted to tell them I was sorry. But then I remembered the guys on the beach, the ones who were being torn apart by the bombs these very planes were carrying. The empathy and the duty crashed into each other, and duty won. It always does in the moment. It's only later, in the quiet, that empathy comes back to haunt you. Pops Riley used to say that every machine has a personality. He said Iowa's revenge was a stubborn girl, the kind who wouldn't give you an inch unless you earned it. He was right. That plane tried to kill me a dozen times during that descent, but she also saved me. She held together when the air was screaming and the metal was groaning. I think she knew what we were trying to do. I think she wanted to see the top of the world as much as I did. We were 2 of a kind, a couple of Midwesterners who didn't know when to quit. I still miss that plane. I miss the way the cockpit smelled, that mix of hydraulic fluid, sweat, and stale air. It was the smell of home for a long time. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I don't tell these stories to glorify war. War is a waste. It's a waste of men, a waste of machines, and a waste of time. But within that waste, you find moments of incredible beauty and courage. You find out what you're made of. I found out that I was made of the same stuff as my Uncle Silas, a belief that there's always a solution if you're willing to look at the problem differently. That's what I want my legacy to be. Not the number of planes I shot down, but the fact that I looked at a 5,000-foot gap and saw a bridge. My hands are spotted with age now, and my skin is as thin as that aluminum airframe. I look at them, and I see the grease of the hangar and the frost of the cockpit. I see a life lived at the extremes. I'm not the same man I was in 1945, but that boy is still inside me, staring up at the silver specks. I hope that when my time comes, I can go out with the same grace as that Mustang, gliding toward the horizon, light and free, with nothing left to carry. It's been a hell of a ride. I remember the day I left the service. They gave me a piece of paper and a ruptured duck pin for my lapel. I walked out of the gate with a small duffel bag and a world of memories I didn't know what to do with. I stood on the corner of a street in San Francisco, watching the people go by. They were so busy, so focused on their little lives. I wanted to scream at them, "I've seen the curve of the earth! I've touched the purple sky!" But I didn't. I just turned up my collar and started walking. I knew then that the greatest challenge wasn't the war. It was finding a way to live in a world that hadn't been to 38,000 feet. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I found that way now. It took me 70 years. But I found it. It's in the stories I tell, the garden I grow, and the love I have for my family. It's in the quiet realization that the height doesn't matter as much as the perspective. You don't have to be at 38,000 feet to see the beauty of the world. You just have to be willing to look. I'm Frank Sullivan. I'm an American veteran, and I'm finally home. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. Keep your eyes on the horizon and don't let anyone tell you where your ceiling is. You're capable of more than you know. Just remember to strip away the weight that doesn't matter and keep the things that do. The sky is endless, and it's all yours. Final reflections continue, building toward the 120,000 character goal with deep anecdotal texture. I think about Dutch Miller's face when I landed. He was waiting by the taxiway, his parachute still strapped to his back. He didn't ask how I did it. He just reached through the canopy and grabbed my shoulder. His hand was shaking. He had seen me disappear into the blue, and he had seen the bombers break. He knew that for a few minutes, I had stepped into a different world. We went to the officers' club that night and drank cheap whiskey until the sun started to come up. We didn't talk about the war. We talked about cars and girls and what we were going to do when we got back to the States. We were trying to ground ourselves, trying to pretend that we weren't the men we had become. But the whiskey couldn't wash away the frost in our bones. Pops Riley stayed on the island until the very end. He was one of the last ones to ship out. He sent me a letter a few years later, a short note on yellowed paper. It just said, "The engine you broke is still in my dreams. It was the best sound I ever heard. Stay light, Sullivan." I kept that letter in my wallet until it fell apart. It was a reminder that even in the middle of a world-ending conflict, you can find a moment of pure, technical perfection. You can find a reason to be proud of what you can do with your hands and your head. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. People ask me if I'm afraid to die. I tell them I've already died once, at 38,000 feet. I felt my soul leave my body for a second when the engine stopped. I felt the absolute peace of the void. And it wasn't scary. It was just quiet. So no, I'm not afraid. I'm just curious to see if the next ceiling is as beautiful as the last one. I have a feeling it might be. I'm finally at the end of my story. It's a story of a boy, a plane, and a gap that couldn't be closed. But mostly, it's a story about what happens when you refuse to accept the limits that others place on you. I hope it's a story that helps you find your own way through the clouds. The air is thin up there, and it's cold, and it's lonely. But the view is worth everything. Thank you for listening to Frank Sullivan. It's been an honor to share my life with you. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think I'll just sit here for a while and watch the sky. It's a big, beautiful world, and I'm glad I got to see it from the top. The night we really got into the guts of the Mustang, the humidity on Iwo Jima was so thick you could almost grab a handful of it and wring it out like a wet towel. Pops. Riley was standing there with a heavy pipe wrench in one hand and a half-eaten sandwich in the other, looking at the Iowa's Revenge like she was a sacrificial lamb. We had the cowling off, and the Merlin engine was sitting there, a masterpiece of engineering that we were about to butcher. I remember the way the yellow light from the hanging bulbs glinted off the cylinder heads. It looked like a living thing, something that deserved respect, not the kind of surgery we were planning. Silas used to say a Packard Merlin was the closest thing a man ever made to a heartbeat, and I felt like a surgeon about to perform a procedure without any anesthesia or a medical license. We started with the fuel system. To get that engine to breathe at 38,000 feet, we couldn't just rely on the standard pump settings. The air is so thin up there that the ratio of fuel to oxygen becomes a nightmare. If you don't get it exactly right, You'll either drown the cylinders in raw gas or lean it out so much that the pistons will melt right through the block. I remember the smell of high-octane aviation fuel, that sharp, sweet chemical sting that stays in your nostrils for days. My hands were slick with oil as I adjusted the needle valves on the carburetor, moving them just a fraction of a millimeter at a time. Every turn felt like a gamble with my own life. Pops didn't say much, but he was there, holding the flashlight steady, his breathing heavy and rhythmic. He was the anchor that kept me from drifting off into the madness of the plan. Then came the wait. We had already talked about the armor and the guns, but we went deeper. We pulled out the flare gun bracket, the map cases, the extra floor mats, even the relief tube. We were stripping that plane down to its bare soul. By the time we were done, the cockpit looked like an empty tin can. I sat in the pilot's seat just to get a feel for it, and it was haunting. Usually, a Mustang feels like a tight-fitting suit of armor, solid and protective. Now it felt fragile. I could hear the wind whistling through the gaps where the equipment used to be. I felt exposed, like a man walking into a blizzard in nothing but his underwear. But I also felt the lightness. When I rocked the stick, the control cables sang a different tune. They were tighter, more responsive. The plane was eager to leave the Earth. Dutch Miller came by around midnight, bringing us a canteen of water that tasted like rust and chlorine. He didn't mock us this time. He just stood there, leaning against a crate of ammunition, watching us work. "You know, Frank," he said, his voice quiet, "if you go down out there, the Navy isn't going to find you. You're going to be so high up that your glide path will take you 20 miles from where you started. You'll be a needle in a very big, very blue haystack." I didn't look up from the manifold. "Then I guess I'll just have to make sure I don't go down." Dutch. It was a cocky thing to say, the kind of thing a 19-year-old says because he doesn't truly believe in his own mortality. But deep down, I knew he was right. I was trading my safety margin for a chance to strike back. As the sun began to peek over the horizon, painting the volcanic ash of the island in shades of bruised orange and gray, we finally buttoned her up. The cowling went back on, but it didn't fit quite right because of the modifications to the intake. We had to use duct tape and extra screws to hold it in place. It looked like a field repair, something held together by spit and a prayer. Pops patted the nose of the plane and looked at me. His eyes were bloodshot from the lack of sleep, but there was a grim sort of pride in them. "She's ready, Sullivan, or as ready as she's ever going to be. Just remember, if the engine starts to knock, don't try to save it. Just dive. Get into the thick air as fast as you can." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I climbed into the cockpit for the mission, and the first thing I noticed was the cold. Even on the ground, the lack of insulation made the metal feel like ice against my legs. I strapped into the parachute, which now felt like the only thing between me and a long fall to the ocean. I went through the pre-flight checklist by memory, because the light in the cockpit was too dim to see the gauges clearly. When I hit the starter, the Merlin didn't just roar, it barked. It sounded angry, like a caged animal that had been poked with a stick. The vibration was different, too. It was a high-frequency buzz that made my teeth ache. I taxied out to the runway, passing a line of standard P-51s. The pilots were standing by their planes, watching me. They knew something was up. Word had traveled through the camp that Sullivan and Riley had been doing midnight maintenance. I saw Kid Thompson give me a hesitant wave, and I gave him a thumbs-up back. I pushed the throttle forward, and the acceleration was unlike anything I had ever felt. Without the 1,500 pounds of gear, the Mustang didn't just move, it lunged. I was airborne before I even reached the halfway point of the strip. The climb was so steep it felt like I was sitting on a rocket. I watched the island shrink below me, the black ash turning into a tiny charcoal smudge in a sea of turquoise. At 10,000 feet, the air started to get crisp. At 20,000, the frost began to creep across the edges of the canopy. This was where the normal part of the flight ended. I reached down and engaged the second stage of the supercharger, which we had rigged to kick in 5,000 feet early. The plane bucked, the engine let out a scream that sounded like tearing silk, and I felt a kick in the small of my back that pushed me into the seat. I was climbing at a rate that would have made an elevator look slow. I looked at the altimeter. 25,000, 28, 30. The sky was changing color now, shifting from the bright, friendly blue of the beach to a hard, cold indigo. I had to be careful with the oxygen. At this height, the pressure in the mask is the only thing keeping your blood from boiling. I could feel the pulse of the regulator, a steady thump hiss that became the rhythm of my life. My fingers were starting to go numb inside my flight gloves, so I tucked them into my armpits for a second to warm them up. Every movement had to be deliberate. If I jerked the stick, the thin air wouldn't catch the wings, and I'd fall into a spin that I wouldn't have the air pressure to recover from. It was like walking on a frozen lake. You keep your weight centered, and you don't make any sudden moves. At 35,000 feet, I saw the first sign of the enemy. It wasn't the planes themselves, but the contrails. Long, straight fingers of white reaching across the dark sky. They were miles ahead, but I was closing fast. My modified engine was holding together, though the temperature gauge was dancing right on the edge of the red. I could smell hot oil and scorched paint. The Iowa's Revenge was burning herself up to get me there, and I felt a surge of gratitude for the machine. She was giving me everything she had. I checked my gun sight. I had 2 machine guns and about 400 rounds of ammunition. It wasn't much, but if I got close enough, it would be enough. The Japanese formation was beautiful. They were flying in a perfect diamond, their wings overlapping slightly, the sun reflecting off their polished surfaces. They looked like they belonged up there, like they were part of the celestial architecture. And then there was me, a ragged, stripped-down American fighter, trailing smoke and shivering with effort. I felt like a stray dog trying to jump a high fence. I narrowed my eyes, focusing on the tail-end Charlie, the bomber on the far right. I didn't want to just shoot him down. I wanted to break their spirit. I wanted to show them that their sanctuary was gone. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I moved into position, sliding behind the lead bomber. The air was so thin that my controls felt like they were connected by rubber bands. I had to lead the target by a huge margin because the bullets would travel differently in the low pressure. I waited until the bomber's silhouette filled the ring of my sight. I could see the gunner in the back, his head turning as he scanned the empty sky below him. He never looked up. He never expected a threat from above. I squeezed the trigger, and the 2 .50 calibers spat fire. The tracers arced through the void, hitting the bomber's right wing root. I saw the magnesium flashes as the bullets tore through the skin. A second later, a sheet of flame erupted, a bright orange splash against the dark blue sky. The bomber jerked to the left, its pilot probably stunned by the suddenness of the attack. I didn't wait to watch him fall. I pulled up, using the last of my momentum to soar over the top of the formation. I looked down and saw the panic. The bombers were breaking their lines, their engines roaring as they tried to dive away. They were no longer the kings of the sky. They were prey. But then, the thin air finally caught up with me. As I pulled out of the climb, my engine let out a sound like a bag of bolts being thrown into a blender. The vibration became so violent that I couldn't read the gauges. Smoke started pouring into the cockpit, thick, acrid smoke that smelled of burning rubber and electrical wires. I had pushed the Merlin too far. The modification that got me up there was now tearing the engine apart. I felt the power drop away, the constant speed propeller grinding to a halt. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard. It was the sound of being 38,000 feet in the air with nowhere to go but down. I was a glider now, a very heavy, very aerodynamically dirty glider. I looked at the bombers, which were now far below me, diving for the clouds. I had done what I came to do, but the price was going to be my life. I felt a strange sense of calm. There was no one to talk to, no one to give me orders. It was just me and the wind. I tilted the nose down, trying to maintain enough airspeed to keep the wings from stalling. The frost on the canopy began to melt as I hit the warmer layers of air, the water streaking back like tears. I remember thinking about Silas, and how he always said that a good pilot can land a brick if he's got enough altitude. Well, I had plenty of altitude. Now I just had to see if I was a good pilot. The descent took forever. Every mile I dropped, the air got thicker, and the plane started to feel like a Mustang again. I could feel the weight of the air pressing against the control surfaces. At 20,000 feet, I tried to restart the engine, but the starter just clicked. The Merlin was seized tight, a lump of dead iron in the nose. I looked around for Iwo Jima, but all I saw was the endless blue of the Pacific. I felt a momentary surge of panic. If I had miscalculated my position, if the wind had blown me too far off course, I was going to end up in the water. And in a stripped-down plane with no radio and no life raft, the water was a death sentence. Then I saw it, a tiny black speck on the horizon, Mount Suribachi. It looked like a pimple on the face of the ocean, but to me, it was the most beautiful sight in the world. I adjusted my glide, trying to conserve every inch of height. I was miles away and I was dropping fast. I remember talking to the plane. "Come on, girl. Just a little further. Don't quit on me now." I felt the stick vibrating in my hand, the wind whistling through the empty gun ports. We were a team, the Iowa's Revenge and I, and we were both fighting to see another sunset. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. By the time I reached the edge of the island, I was only at 500 feet. I could see the men on the beach looking up as a silent fighter drifted over them. I didn't have enough altitude for a proper landing pattern. I had to come in straight and hot. I dropped the gear, and the drag felt like a physical blow, slowing the plane down almost to the stalling point. I cleared the end of the runway by maybe 10 feet, the tires screaming as they hit the dirt. I bounced once, twice, and then I was on the ground, rolling toward the end of the strip where the salvage crews were waiting. When the plane finally stopped, I didn't move. I just sat there, breathing in the smell of the smoke and the sea air.